Hello there, and thank you for joining me. Today I think I've got a bit of a treat, certainly it's a treat for me. As part of a trio of 2017 clarets that I'm looking at, I have some Chateau Batailley 2017. Now I'm doing these tastings as a result of a discussion with a friend, a negociant from Bordeaux, because at the moment I think there's such a plethora of vintages available on the market that I asked him which vintages we should be drinking, and he suggested that the 2017s were looking very good at the moment and were worth revisiting. So to Chateau Batailley, 5th growth. The property sits on a plateau in Pauillac to the west of Mouton-Rothschild. It's a historic site. The name Bataille is derived from the word battle. In 1452 there was a battle on this site, simply known as La Bataille, taking place between the French and the English towards the culmination of the 100 Years' War. And although not as important as the Battle of Castillon, another notable step in these sort of last phases of this war, in the drive towards expelling the English from Aquitaine. Evidently, this was the battle that saw the recapture of Chateau from the English. The Chateau Batailley is one of the oldest estates in Pauillac, and vines have been planted here and wines made since at least the 17th century. I have seen different dates for this, but certainly at least the 17th century, possibly earlier. Now the current name Bataille has been used since the 18th century, and at that stage 3 siblings from a notable Pauillac family, the St Martin family, were running the estate. Now after this ownership becomes a little confused, I believe that parts of the chateau were sold off by the 2 sisters in 1791. So in 1816, when a really notable character from Bordeaux, Daniel Guestier, purchases the property, he has to reunite the estate. He restores it, modernises the facilities, increases the area of the vineyard, and generally improves the quality of the wine significantly. His son took over the estate in 1847, and it was the Guestier family that asked somebody called Jean-Pierre Deschamps, a landscape architect who had worked for Napoleon III, to landscape a 6-hectare park for the chateau. In 1855, thanks to the improvements that Daniel Guestier has made to the quality of the wines, Chateau Batailley is ranked as a 5th growth amongst the Cru Classe. And in 1866, the Guestiers sold the estate to a Parisian banker. It was in the early 20th century, 1924, the Boire brothers, Marcel and Francis, purchased the estate, marking the start of its current owner, Boire, and through marriage the Casteja family. So in 1941, the 2 brothers divided the property, and this was to avoid complications with inheritance. So the larger part of the chateau retained the name, the park, the house, and that became the sole property of Marcel, and his brother, Francis, assumed ownership of the newly created Haut Batailley. So the estate becomes the property of the Casteja family because Marcel Boire's daughter Denise marries Emile Casteja. When she inherited the estate in 1961, Emile took over its management and ran the chateau for almost 40 years, till his son Philippe, the current proprietor, took over its running in the year 2000. From 2002, Philippe set about to improve the estate and its wines. A large part of this was the improvement of the vat house in 2006. Subsequent to that, they were then able to vinify every plot from the vineyard individually. From this time onwards, Chateau Batailley has gone from strength to strength. In 2015, they released a 2nd wine, the Lions de Bataille, and in 2019, a 3rd wine, the Pauillac de Bataille. And all this was contributing tiny incremental improvements to the quality of the wines here. Now, Chateau Batailley is an estate of about 100 hectares. Of this, there are 57 hectares of vines. An average vine age is quite an impressive 40 years. The soils are silica and gravel, the heart of the vineyard here being a deep gravel bed over a subsoil of clay and sandstone. But they do also have a few parcels located between Château Latour and Château Pichon-Lalande. Varietal plantings in the vineyard are somewhere in the region of 70% Cabernet Sauvignon, 25% Merlot, with 3% of Cabernet Franc and 2% of Petit Verdot. Now 2017 was a reasonably good vintage for Pauillac. It began with a mild winter, but then in spring there were some absolutely atrocious frosts. However, Pauillac seemed to avoid some of the worst of that. I mean, a lot of Pauillac is close to the river. Batailley is further inland, but its situation on the plateau means there are very few low-lying pockets of land for frost to catch in, so it's quite fortunate in that way. Eventually, June showed some warm weather. However, this was accompanied by quite high humidity and rain, and temperatures then dipped in June and August. So it was the sunny, dry September that ensured that the grapes reached a decent ripeness. This did ensure the fruit retained good acidity, and you see quite a lot of the aromatics from a cooler vintage showing through, with the fruit probably more on the red fruit end of the spectrum than the black fruit end. The wines tend to be medium bodied, but tend to have quite good balance. Alcohols aren't particularly high, but there's quite a reasonable structure coming from the tannins. The fruit for this wine is entirely hand harvested. Careful sorting goes on both in the vineyard and at the winery at the reception. The grapes were destemmed and then gently crushed. Fermentation went on plot by plot, and with a post-fermentation maceration, that process lasted 25 days. Fermentation was in stainless steel tanks, and the wine stayed in those tanks to do its malolactic conversion before being put into French oak barrels. These were barriques, 225 litre barrels. 50% of those were new, and the balance was second-year oak, and the wine stayed in barrel for about 18 months prior to bottling. The final blend in 2017 was 80% Cabernet Sauvignon, with 17% of Merlot and 3% of Petit Verdot. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? I'll start by saying that that is almost opaque. It's deep, it's a dark, almost sort of black ruby. There's a hint of purple still in the colour. The colour is still quite vivacious. It holds quite well to the rim. Looking at it, it's taking a little while to throw some tears onto the side of the glass. The wine is labelled as 13.5%. I believe that technically it's actually 13.6, but you can only put a half degree on a label in the EU. So that's the completely correct way of labelling that. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The aromas at first seem a little closed. There is a sort of an earthy, meaty, savoury note to them. Perhaps there's a hint of graphite, maybe that's that earthiness that I'm talking about. But then behind that, there's quite a high-toned, fresh note, starting as red currant and cranberry, and then moving up to be more of a black fruit. There's a cassis note, and perhaps even a touch of black cherry. There's certainly plenty going on in there. So let's have a taste. On the palate, the first thing you notice is excellent freshness. The acidity really has a mouth-watering nature, and that's setting off that red currant note that soon fills out to be much more of a sort of a cassis, a black currant note. Black fruit is becoming more apparent on the palate. However, the quite juicy, fresh fruit is soon overlaid by a toasty oak that sits quite squarely in the middle of the palate. Part of the mouth-watering nature that's going on here are some really fine, firm tannins. They're fine and smooth. Perhaps now I'm starting to see some more developed notes. There's perhaps the slightest hint of mushroom in here. The freshness is giving a lovely long finish. The wine is at least medium bodied, perhaps medium to medium plus, medium full bodied, but the finish is long and fresh. Then I'm getting notes of cedar and graphite, all beautifully integrated in with some quite black cherry fruit. There are perhaps some slight chocolatey notes coming through. The wine's freshness and its initial cassis, followed on by its structure and the savoury, cedary, tannic notes coming from the oak aging. I think that although there is this lovely sort of fresh, lively, energetic, mouth-watering fruit, it's just starting to show some notes of development, and you're left with a clean, mouth-watering sensation of juicy black fruit. There is a complex harmony between that black fruit and the cedary and toasty notes from the oak aging, but they do actually sit really quite nicely together. Given the wine's freshness and structure, I think it probably is a wine that would continue to age for at least another 10 years, probably longer. I've seen suggestions that this would be drinking up until 2045. I certainly don't think that's impossible, but I think maybe it might be better to drink it earlier during that period rather than later, so that you get that lovely fresh fruit vibrancy. Because the wine doesn't have a great weight, it's possible that later on in its development it might become leaner and a bit more austere. Just at the moment, however, I feel that this is starting to drink really nicely. I looked at the Wine Search aggregated critic score for this, and this vintage scores 91 out of 100, which I think is reasonably fair, but I think a case could be made that this is a wine that deserves 92 points maybe. It's certainly a wine I'm enjoying. I would suggest that Batailley is normally quite well priced for a wine of its quality from Pauillac, but just so that you can see how that stacks up in your market, I'll leave a link to the webpage on the Wine Search website in the notes below so that you can follow that and you can see if it's available and what price it is near you. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you found the video of interest. If you have enjoyed it, do please press the like button. That would be fantastic. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, if you could subscribe to my channel and sign up there, that would be great. And also, as you sign up, you can set yourself an alert and you can be notified every time I publish a new tasting. If you have any comments you'd like to leave, do please pop them in the comments box below. That would be fantastic. And if you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, it would be great if you'd pass it on to them. That would be a fantastic endorsement from you. I'd really appreciate that. So I'd like to give my thanks to the negociant's Boire Manoux for sending me the samples so that I could taste it and share that with you. I'd also like to thank you once again for joining me, and I do hope you'll make some time and come and join me for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.